Hello and welcome to this Blender Beginners video tutorial. In this video tutorial I'm going to be showing you how to create materials in Blender for the Blender render Blender render engine. So now these render engines, I just said Blender render engine, you're probably, whoa, what's that? A render engine is what creates your final image. So I mean, here in the editor, I mean, what you're busy with now doesn't look like what top guys produce. And that's because you use something called a render engine when you're done to render something. So now, materials are linked to render engines. And, for example, so Blender has two render engines. It has their new one, Cycles Render, and their oldish one, Blender Render. Now, both of them are good. Don't think that the new one's better than the old one. They're both good. They serve different purposes. So, for example, Cycles is based on realism. Blender Render is speed, kind of. It's very fast. So, with the materials, they're linked to these render engines because Cycles needs realistic materials, so they give you a lot of options. Well, Blender Internal just needs materials, and you can make them advanced, but that also slows it down. So they give you, it's the properties of a material are dependent on the render engine that you use. So enough of that. So I'm sure you get the idea now. So I'm going to be using the Blender render engine because I think it's simpler to start with than Cycles. Cycles can get very confusing. So we're just going to use Blender render. And so to begin, you have to switch to the materials panel. So you should see here in the properties panel, it's this ball with this grid at the background. Select that and you get taken to the materials panel. Now Blender render will look like this. If you, to create a material, by the way, you would just simply go click new. So if you came here, just click new and you create a material. You'd be greeted by a preview. A preview is just showing what the material looks like while you're creating it. Let's go and change the diffuse color. Now diffuse color is the color of the object itself. So it's not that complicated, it's just the color. So you can see, let's change it to a green, and the object is green now. And it shows you here in your viewport. And then this intensity is how intense the color is, so it doesn't have to be very intense, or it can be very intense. Okay, these are the types of shaders that you can get. You don't really need to worry about that. Ramp allows you to have different colors based on where the light's hitting an object. So I can have it green, or let's say red, where the so I can have it red. It's going to be green where it hits it. Then it's going to go red, and then we can make it go a yellow. So that's what a ramp is, but we're just going to use a solid diffuse color. Then you get specular. Specular is the highlight on the object where the light reflects off. So that white highlight there is specular. So we can change this to a black, which means you can't see it, or you can change it to any color you want. So actually, to a blue, you'll see there's a slight blue there. Then intensity, just like the intensity there, adjust the intensity for the specular, and the hardness. The less the hardness, the more you can see the more obvious the specularity is. And then of course the harder it is, the sharper the edge. Yeah. So I'm just going to set that back to default. I'm going to put that at 0.5, but I'll leave it with a blue material. I actually like that. Then once again, these are the different specular shaders you can get. So you can get tune, and you can see they do different effects. You can play around. but I'm just going to stay on Cook Tool. Then the ramp is also the same thing as we covered there. We can adjust how we want what it must look like when the light hits it. But yes, so that's all for the specular. Let's move on. Shading. Now the shading, it controls the shadows and stuff like that. So now you can emit light. So an object can emit light. So if we turn that up, you'll see it turns bright and it gets rid of the shadows after a while, because it's actually emitting light now. So default is 0. Okay. Then the ambient. This is how much of the ambient color. So ambient color is, it's the color that the environment emits naturally, like in all directions. So that's really not really that important, because we don't use ambient right now. Then translucency. Translucency is almost like transparency. So think when you had something transparent, when light shines on the one surface, it's going to shine on the other surface as well. So translucency allows you to get the light to shine through it without actually making the thing transparent. And this works well with especially stuff like your eraser, or grass, or leaves, or it's a lot of places that have translucency. It adds a bit of realism also. Okay, then we get to the transparency. Transparency, if we tick it, will allow us to control the transparency of an object. So you get mask. So mask is, if you change that, you'll see it turns a sky color if it's at 0, which means that it's the same as the background color. So whatever the background is, it's going to be that. So it's nice to like cut holes in objects and stuff. So yes, so the mask is going to just mask it a little. It's going to blend in with the background basically. You don't need to know all of this. It's really a lot of controls. Then you get your alpha. Okay, so the alpha is transparency, I'm sure you've seen. And Z transparency is just transparent. There's no, it doesn't look like glass. When it's like that, it doesn't really look like glass. Okay? And that's where ray trace comes in. Ray trace has a lot of controls, but the important ones are alpha, which once again controls transparency. So let's set it at 0.5. Now you'll see this thing, IOR. IOR stands for Index of Refraction. Now you can go online and different transparent substances have different indexes of refractions, different refraction values. So glass is 1.52, if I remember correctly. And when we change, IOR 1.52, and you'll see when we change it, it starts to distort the background, which looks more like glass. Okay, and then finally, so you get the IOR. I'm just going to set that back to 1, which means no distortion. Then you get gloss, so you just get the amount, and when you change that, it blurs the glass a bit, like that. So, I mean, those are the controls I usually use. I think I may have used 1 or 2 more controls once or twice, but those are the important ones. Okay, so I'm going to disable transparency now, and I'm just going to minimize it by clicking this arrow. Now let's move on to mirror. So mirror, well, I guess, is a reflection. Sure, you guessed it. So, okay, reflectivity obviously changes the reflection. So you can see it's reflecting its environment now. Then you can set the reflection color. So we can set it to reflect blue. So when it reflects it with a bluish color. And yeah, so that's, yeah, it can be important. Then you get the depth. This is how many times it must reflect things. So if you had mirrors looking at each other, of course going to reflect each other infinitely. So if it was at 2, you'd only see like a mirror inside a mirror. You wouldn't see any more because it's not reflecting. It has to reflect So it's basically how many times to reflect it must reflect the other thing, the other object. Okay, so put it simply. Okay, so I'm just going to also disable mirror and minimize it. The shadows. Now, receive shadows means it can receive shadows from other objects. And then receive transparent means that it can, if another object's transparent, by default, Blender doesn't allow that object's transparent shadow to shine on. So say you had a glass on a table. By default, the glass won't cast a transparent shadow on the table. You have to go to the table material and tick receive transparent. Okay, so that will be for the table. Then you can say shadows only. So it means that it's going to render the shadows only of the object. So no object, only shadows. So that's the shadow options. So you've created your material. One last thing. You've created your material, but now you want to preview it. So to preview it, you will go press F12, which will render. So you can see we can see our material. Now it may look black and ugly, but that's because of lighting and stuff like that. It's a lot of things. So, and it's Blender render, remember, so it's not realistic. Okay, Cycles produces much nicer results. That when, of course, I don't want to hate on Blender render because it has its own advantages that Cycles doesn't. And then one last thing before we finish up, I want to just show you how to assign a material to an object. So now because we created the material on the cube has it. But now if we were to go and create a sphere and just drag it out, you can see it has no material. So to assign it a material, you'll just go here to this drop down and you'll select the material and it will be given the material. Now when we render, we can see there's our blue diffuse, by the way. Sorry, specular. So that's it for this tutorial. It's long, but I hope it was informative and I hope it helped you. So till next time, bye.